about our church is the fact that every Sunday seems to be somebody's first Sunday. And if that's you, if today is your first day at ACC, there's a couple things I want to say to you. One, I got a chance to meet some of you on the front porch, but I didn't get a chance to meet all of you. I want you to know, we are so glad that you're here. Seriously, the fact that you would spend a part of your weekend with us is just overwhelming. There's lots of other places that you could be. And even if you woke up this morning and decided, you know what, I think I should go to church today, there are lots of other great churches that you could be at. So the fact that you would come and hang out with us is really quite humbling. And so I want to say thank you for doing that. The second thing I want you to know is we are now in part 46 of a series through the Gospel of Luke titled Jesus Stories. That's a true story, part 46. And our motivation behind it all has been to build the posture of our faith, or in some cases maybe rebuild, but to build it on the person of Jesus as opposed to the products or the byproducts of religion. Because as I've said before, one of those sets us up to create a God in our own image. And what I mean by that is a God who thinks like we think, who acts like we act, who hates what we hate and responds the way that we respond. But the other conforms us to his image. It changes us. It causes us to see that labeling ourselves as a Christian is something more than just identifying with a group of people or of Jesus followers, but it's actually following Jesus in every area, in every facet of our life. And one of the things that Luke has been fantastic at is pointing out some of the gaps that exist in that journey and helping us to fill those gaps with the words and the ways of Jesus. Like the Christian life itself is set up to be one giant lifelong game of follow the leader. So we learn who Jesus is, we watch what Jesus does, and then we follow suit. It sounds simple enough, right? But I'm telling you, our tendency to put something or someone else at the front of that leader line has made this whole thing very, very complex. That's why I love passages of scripture like the one that we come to today in Luke chapter 19. Because this passage, just like a game of follow the leader, it's so simple. It clears away all the mystery of religion, all the inconsistency of religious people, and helps us to see some of the simplest, greatest truths of the gospel. So if you have a Bible or want to pull one up on your phone or your tablet and follow along today, you can do that. In Luke chapter 19, that's where we are going to be. And while you're making your way there, let me give you our big idea for today's message, and that is this. Because of Jesus, the worst chapter of your story does not have to be the last chapter of your story. Because of Jesus, the worst chapter of your story, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but it does not have to be the last chapter of your story. Let's look at what Luke records for us. Luke chapter 19, beginning in verse 1, he says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner? But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Lord, look, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. And I love this part. He said, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Throughout these last 2 chapters, Luke has introduced us to a variety of different people who were trying to meet Jesus. Some came in like actual flesh and bone. Some came in the form of a story. He introduced us to a widow. He introduced us to a Pharisee. He introduced us to another tax collector. He introduced us to a guy that we refer to as the rich young ruler. Last week, we learned about a guy who was a blind beggar. His name was Bartimaeus. And today, he introduces us to this wee little man that we know as Zacchaeus. Now, those of us who grew up in Sunday school or going to vacation Bible school, this is how we learned about him, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and help me out. And a wee little man was he. Yeah, that's right. I was going to sing it for you, but we would clear the room. I don't know if it's politically correct, but according to Luke, it's true. He was a short guy, and he climbed in a tree because he wanted to see Jesus. And as a result, this little guy who had some big problems in his life experienced a giant change. Now, I'm not sure we were able to comprehend all of it when we were kids singing this song. But the reason that we would sing this song over and over again, and the reason that some of us would teach this song to our children is because it displays some of the greatest truths about God. Truths that are so simple to sing about and believe when we're little. But I'm telling you, they have a way of getting lost in the complexity, in the difficulty of growing into an adult. So this morning, I want us to go back and unpack Zacchaeus' story. And as we do that, I want to inform when it comes to some things, maybe remind us when it comes to others of some of these simple truths in Zacchaeus' story that changed his story and hold the potential to change ours. I got 3 truths I want to share with you today. The first one is this. Truth number 1 is that God knows who you are, and he meets you where you are. God knows who you are, and he meets you where you are. Just as Luke had done with Bartimaeus, he begins Zacchaeus' story by telling us who he was, how he was, and where he was. He says in verse 2 that Zacchaeus was a tax collector, he was wealthy, and that he was living in Jericho. Now, in Jesus' day, if you were wealthy, it was primarily due to one of 2 things. Either you had inherited your wealth, or 2, you were involved in something sketchy. And we know from Zacchaeus' story that it was definitely the latter of those 2, that he was involved in something sketchy. Luke tells us that not only was Zacchaeus a tax collector, but he was a chief tax collector, meaning he was at the top of the food chain of tax collectors, maybe more crooked than all the other tax collectors. Now, we've talked a lot about this over the last few weeks, and I won't dive into the weeds again with it today, but if today's your first day and you're thinking, so what's the big deal about being a tax collector? Just know this, Jews hated tax collectors. They looked at the occupation itself and just thought, like, this is one of the most immoral, unrighteous, anti-Semitic jobs on the planet. And you just thought your emotions and feelings about the IRS was complicated. This was extremely, extremely complicated. So Luke says, hey, here's this guy named Zacchaeus. He's living in Jericho. Jericho was one of the 3 major centers for trading in Israel. And he's not just a tax collector, the chief tax collector, like he's the kingpin of the Jericho tax collecting cartel. He has lined his pockets by exploiting his own people, which helps to make sense of the story. Because when you know that about Zacchaeus, then you know, like, of course nobody is going to let Zacchaeus in the front of the line to be able to see Jesus. They didn't just dislike Zacchaeus, they hated him. I was trying to think this week of someone that our society might look at the way that these guys and girls looked at Zacchaeus. And the name that came to my mind originally was Bernie Madoff. Do you guys remember Bernie Madoff? He was a guy who ran the Ponzi scheme, like stole the life savings of nearly like 5,000 different people. But I'm realizing, like, I'm 46 years old. Like, things that seem like yesterday to me actually are documentaries now on A&E. It's like, when did that? I remember, it's like they just sang this song yesterday. And so I thought, well, I should probably make sure that that's even a thing these days. And so I went to some of the offices of some of the younger staff members and I asked them, hey, you guys know who Bernie Madoff is? And they were like, hold on just a second. Like, man, was that the basketball player? No. And so they were like, no, why are you asking? And I said, well, I'm trying to think of somebody that society looks at and like disdain, go, oh, we don't like this guy. And Nate, our audio engineer, Nate said, Pharma guy. That's who you're looking for. Pharma Bro. That's actually what he said. Pharma Bro. Pharma Bro is this pharmaceutical executive who raised the price on this drug called Daraprim. It's a life-saving drug for people with suppressed immune disorders. And he raised the price of the pill from $13.50 a pill to $750 a pill, just because he could. And he lined his pockets with the profits to the tune of $64 million. And I thought, that's it. Nate got it right. Zacchaeus was that guy. In fact, one New Testament scholar said this. He said, the citizens of Jericho would have been horrified to think that of all the people of their town, Zacchaeus would be the one person known by name to the world 2,000 years later. Like, Sunday school loves this guy, but you got to know, society hated him. Zacchaeus, on the surface, seemed to have it all. Didn't really care what people thought. I mean, he had wealth, he had power, he had possessions. And yet, somewhere in that mix, just by the default of the day itself, it seems like something was missing in his life. It makes me wonder if maybe Zacchaeus was beginning to discover this thing that it sometimes takes us a lifetime to discover. And that is that wealth and power and prestige and possessions, the stuff that we spend our lives trying to get, it never fully and finally satisfies, does it? I think of guys like Solomon. You remember him? The Bible describes Solomon as the wisest man to ever live. Not only was he wise, but he was incredibly rich. And Solomon said of himself, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. This was his humble brag of saying, look, I've seen it all, I've done it all, and I've experienced it all. And here's what he said as a result. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, he said, whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. In fact, throughout the 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes, Solomon seems to size up all the stuff that he possessed and pursued as a king, and he describes it all as meaningless. He says it's like chasing after the wind, that you're always running for it, but you never really catch it. Maybe Zacchaeus knew what that felt like, because all the things in his life that he thought were gonna do it for him, they hadn't done it for him. And there was something about Jesus that had piqued his interest. Maybe he had heard about how Jesus had interacted and treated other tax collectors just like him. Maybe he'd heard about how Jesus had called Matthew, a tax collector, to be one of his disciples. He was intrigued, so he wanted to get close. But Luke says in verse 3, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but. And I would imagine that everything that lies on the other side of that conjunction, but, it was just as much mental as it was physical. He wanted to be close to Jesus, but he wasn't really the church-going type. Like, literally, wasn't kosher, hung out with Gentiles, couldn't go to the synagogue even if he wanted to. He wanted to get close to Jesus. He wanted to be where he was, but he wasn't like Jesus. Like, Zacchaeus wasn't a guy who just had a bad season of life, sort of tripped and stumbled into sin. No, here's a guy who cannonballed into the pool of sin. Some of us refer to that as our college years. Zacchaeus did it on purpose. But based on Luke chapter 19, Zacchaeus wanted to be close to Jesus, but too many people knew too much about his life. We've been there before, right? Like, we face those moments when we're in our own brokenness, whether it's circumstances beyond our control or our own poor choices. They led us to a place where we would say, man, I would love to be closer to God, but. And that but gets in the way of everything else that we do. But. Religion is great at stirring up shame in our life. It really is. Religion is fantastic at maintaining this gap between good and you are not good enough. So for all of us who've ever wrestled with that conjunction, with that tension of I would like to be closer, but I want you to pay careful attention to what Jesus did in response to Zacchaeus. Verse 5, it says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. Zacchaeus, he calls Zacchaeus, this tax collector, this guy who had hurt and cheated so many people. He calls him by name and he says, come down. To demonstrate for you and for me and to Zacchaeus that he knew who he was. He knew how he was. And he knew exactly where he was. Luke, who's the only one of the gospel writers to record Zacchaeus' story, Luke tells us, look, this is the whole reason Jesus came in the first place. In verse 10, he said he came to seek and to save the lost. Which means if maybe you, like Zacchaeus, if you're at a place where, you're wanting to write a different story from your future, a story that has a better ending than the stories and the chapters of your past, then I want you to know, God knows who you are. He knows how you are, and he knows exactly where you are, and he will meet you right there. Which means that you don't have to wait until you finally get into a better, more favorable position with the church or with religion or with God until he will interact with you. No, he knows who you are, and he'll meet you where you are. It's just the truth of the gospel. The second thing is this. Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name. He tells him to come down out of the tree, but that's not all he says to him. Look back at verse 5. He looks up at Zacchaeus and says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down and he welcomed him gladly. In verse 7, all the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner? Like, they weren't okay with this. And had you and I been in the audience that day, I imagine we wouldn't have been okay with it either. We too would have said, are you kidding me? Like, this guy is going to that guy's house? Like, Jesus, I know you called him by name, but do you know who he is? Like, do you really know? Do you know what this guy does? Do you know how he's cheated people, how he's hurt people, how he's abused people, and he's been proud of it? He doesn't deserve for you to go to his house. And you know what? It's true. He didn't deserve to have Jesus go to his house. But that's what leads us to the second truth in Zacchaeus' story. And that's this, that grace is a gift, not a gratuity. Grace is a gift. It's the free, unmerited favor of God. It is a gift. It's not a gratuity. It's not the byproduct of services performed. You see, I think growing up singing this childhood song about Zacchaeus in Sunday school, I think it's made us pretty sympathetic to Zacchaeus' story. But if Zacchaeus were a guy in our world, like literally in the sphere of people who we know, who hurt people, who abuse people, who misuse people, we too would be saying, no, hey, hold on. This is not the way this should go. This guy does not deserve it. And you know what? We'd be right. Someone said it like this, that we can't deserve grace any more than we could plan our own surprise birthday party. It's impossible. And if we could deserve it, if we could earn it, if we could perform our way into it, then we'd have to call it something else because it would no longer be grace. So sure, we like them, we would look at Zacchaeus' story and go like, okay, this just seems like it's unfair. And it is unfair. And when we realize that we don't deserve grace either, we're glad it's unfair. Because when it comes to grace, the plus side of the ledger sheet, it's completely skewed in our direction. I want to give you a picture of this. I want you to think for just a second about the greatest moment of shame in your life. I'm talking about that thing when you tell your story to somebody else. This is the piece of your story that you never, ever tell. Your greatest moment of shame. If you got it, I want you to turn and share it with your neighbor to your, no, okay. Just making sure you guys are still awake. Here's what I want you to do, not verbally, but mentally. I want you to take that thing that you just thought of, and I want you to put it in this blank right here. My greatest moment of shame is, and you're thinking of a day, you're thinking of a moment, you're thinking of a relationship, you're thinking of a job thing. My greatest moment of shame is, I want you to see how grace works. You take this moment, this thing, this blank, and I want you to transfer it over to this blank right here. God's grace, it's bigger than that. God's grace is greater than our past. It's greater than our regret. It's greater than the pain that we've caused. It's greater than the day that we wish we could go back and relive because it hurt so many people in so many different ways. It's greater than our sin, and yes, our shame is huge, or at least it feels that way. But God's grace, it's greater. I was thinking about this week, and I was thinking about growing up in church as a kid and being in Sunday school and singing Zacchaeus' song. You know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and then after that, I would go into big church with the big people, and we would sing a different song that conveyed this same truth. The words to the song we would sing in big church was, grace, grace, God's grace, grace that'll pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace. And here it is, grace that's greater than all our sin. So we look at Zacchaeus and we go, this guy doesn't deserve grace. And we know, you know what? We don't either. Gratuity is what we give and get for services performed. Grace is what fills the gap between our lackluster performance and God's perfect holiness. This is why we refer to the gospel as good news. I love this. Tim Keller said it like this. He said, the gospel is this, that we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared to believe. Yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared to hope. That is grace. And as men and women who have been recipients of it, can I just remind you that we are to be dispensers of it. We are to be distributors of it as well. That reminder is what leads us to this third and final truth in Zacchaeus' story. It's the truth that a life made right makes right. A life that's been made right with God makes right with others. Jesus tells Zacchaeus he wants to go to his house, and Zacchaeus is just beside himself because he knows, like, this just feels so undeserved. The people are indignant because Zacchaeus, he's so undeserving. But look what Zacchaeus did. Verse 8, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. In other words, he too is a part of our family. Zacchaeus said, hey, look, God, I get it. They're right. I've cheated people out of stuff. I've done wrong. So I'm giving 50% of everything I have. Right now, I'm liquidating. I'm giving 50% to the poor. And you got to know, the little guy running the donation station down the street, he was pumped when he got this news because Zacchaeus had some great stuff. He's going, we're getting 50% of that? Are you kidding me? 50%. The Old Testament required that we would maybe give 1/5 of what we had to the poor, but Zacchaeus had amped it up, and he didn't stop there. He said, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything. That if wasn't ambiguous. He was a tax collector. He had cheated some people out of some stuff. The if was, if perhaps there's somebody that I hadn't cheated, but for all those people I have, I'm gonna pay them back 4 times the amount. How crazy is that? It's as if Zacchaeus needed one of us, a Christian, a Jesus follower from 21st century Western civilization to hop in our DeLorean and go back in time and tell him, like, Zach, bro, I realize you are real excited about meeting Jesus, but dude, calm down. Like, you don't have to do that, right? Like, here's the deal. Here's how it works in our world. Like, you just tell Jesus you're sorry. And the Bible says that, behold, all things become new. And so then you just kind of go on and live life, and you you do your own thing. Like, you don't have to worry about this. Don't sweat it. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal to Zacchaeus because Zacchaeus realized that repentance isn't an escape hatch for restitution and restoration. Instead, it's a launching pad for those things to happen. What I mean is the next logical, obvious step for a life that's been made right with God is to do right by making right with the people that we have wronged all along the way. A life that's been made right. It makes right. And I would take it even a step further and say, not only do we right our wrongs with the people that we've wronged, but that we figure out what right looks like with the people who have wronged us. This is why I say we have to build our faith on the person of Jesus, not the byproduct of religion. Because religion will say, you get a pass on this. Religion will say, hey, look, you just follow Jesus, they'll get over it. But Jesus applauded Zacchaeus. He applauded him for as wicked and as evil as he had been. He applauded him because he got it. Because he understood that a life made right makes right. In fact, it's perhaps one of the greatest evidences that we give to the world around us that we're not someone who just says we follow Jesus, but that we actually follow Jesus. I can only imagine, for as wealthy and as rich as Zacchaeus was, this must have cost him a fortune. But you know, he did it. He did it, and the reason I think he did it is because in Jesus, he discovered something that was far more valuable than anything he possessed. I was reminded this week of my oldest daughter, Allie, when she's 19 now. She's a sophomore in college, but when she was like 6 or 7 years old, our neighborhood had one of those community garage sales, and Laurie and I didn't feel like, going in the garage and making all that extra space, and so we decided not to do it. But Allie at 6 had struck up a business deal with a 6-year-old neighbor next door, and they formed a lemonade stand. And so all morning long, they sit outside and peddled ice-cold lemonade to the garage sale shoppers. And then about halfway through the day, we were making lunch, and Allie came in the house with this bag. And he said, well, what do you have in the bag there, Allie? And she said, well, I got gifts. It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. What kind of gifts do you have? And so she reached into this very bag right here, and she pulls out first a stuffed animal. And she said, I got this for Caleb. Caleb's her little brother, and she handed it to him, and he put it in his mouth, and it freaked me out. I was like, oh, don't just, whatever. So she said, oh, Dad, hey, I got this one for you. And it was another stuffed animal about the same. I was like, great, I'll add it to my stuffed animal collection on the bed. I love, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but thank you. And then she looks at my wife, Laurie, and she said, and Mom, I got these for you. And she reached in this bag, and she pulled out these beauties right here. These gold, shiny, well-worn high heels. You have that moment sometimes as a parent where the other parent's in deep, and you could either rescue them or you can kind of be like, oh. So I was like, oh, Allie, those are amazing. And she was like, so Mom is going to love them. I bet she's going to wear them all week long. Laurie was like, you know what? I think I should take these and put them in a special place. And so while Laurie took the shoes and went to find a special place, I asked Allie, I said, Allie, where did you get these things from? And she said, well, Chris's mom, she gave me the stuffed animals when I bought the shoes. And I said, well, how much did you pay for the shoes? She said, they were $3. I said, how do you have $3? She said, well, $3 is what I made at the lemonade stand, Dad. And I said, well, $3 that's a lot of money for a 6-year-old girl. And she said, yep, it was all I had. But I didn't care because I knew Mom would love them. I've kept these shoes for almost 13 years as a reminder of what it looks like to give up what we have for something that we think is far more valuable. Listen, Zacchaeus, he had it all. He had money, he had power, he had a reputation he wasn't really all that proud of, but he could live with. But the day he met Jesus, it changed. The day he met Jesus, he discovered a peace that his money and his possessions would never afford him. And it changed him. He understood, maybe for the first time in his life, there's a God in heaven who knew his name. He knew who he was. He knew the condition of his heart, how he was, and he knew exactly where he was up in that tree. Maybe for the first time, he understood that, you know what? I don't have to try to perform my way into God's good graces. That's called gratuity, but what he's offering is a gift called grace. He understood that as somebody who had received that grace and wanted to distribute it to the people around him, that a life made right with God is a life that makes right with others. So let me ask you. You may not have a long history with tax collecting, but I bet the odds are good. There's been a time in your life where you felt too far gone for God. Where like you've done too much. Like if you could have rewound the story and it would have been 10 years ago, maybe, but not now. Not after the things you've said, the people you've hurt, the places you've been. You too were wondering if God knows who you are and he knows where you are. I pray that today, Zacchaeus' story is a reminder that the answer to that question is yes. He knows you. He knows the deepest parts about you. And you know what? He loves you anyway. He does. He knows who you are. He knows where you are. And if you're somebody who's been thinking, well, I could step into that, maybe you even being here today is a move in that direction. Like if I could just get back in church, then maybe I could, it's like a 1-2 punch. Then maybe I could move a little bit closer to God. Maybe he would extend some grace to me, but I want you to know that it's a gift. It's not something you earn. And if it feels undeserved, then absolutely it should, because it is. And it's available. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, let me ask you a question. And I wrestle with this myself. Like, when's the last time you thought about the fact that a life made right with God makes right with others? Like when you think about that in your life, is there something you need to revisit? Is there a debt that you need to pay? Is there a conversation you need to have? Is there a relationship you need to revisit? Is there an apology that you need to offer? I get it, because I'd say the same. Man, that is not the shiniest moment in my story, but listen, because of Jesus, and only because of Jesus, the worst part in your story and the worst part in my story does not have to be the last part, the last chapter of our story. Old things really can be made new. Some of it, in terms of relationship with God, it's in an instant. In making right with others, sometimes it takes a minute. But the pursuit, the end result, it's always worth it. Would you pray with me? And God, we open our hands to you. I mean, we know this story. We've been singing about it. The world's been singing about it. What feels like decades and decades and decades. And yet it reminds us of some of the greatest truths about who you are. The way that you love us. The way that you pursue us when you were the last thing on our mind. God, I can't help but believe there's some folks that are sitting in this room with us today who they really feel a long way from you. And some of it may be the fact that they've tried and they just can't hear you, but a lot of it might be because we just know ourselves too well. And we think we're unworthy. God, I pray by the power of your Spirit, you would remind us that you know us and you love us. That you sent Jesus to die for us while we were still dead in our trespasses and sin. God, you demonstrated how much you love us in that moment. Not in the moment that we tried to clean ourselves up, So God, I pray that today your grace would be made evident for the man or the woman who's stayed away from you. God, I pray that today would be the day that you pull them in close. For the rest of us who are followers, perhaps longtime followers, but man, we think about how you've made us right, and we know there's some things that we need to make right. God, I pray that you'd help us to do that long beyond this sermon and the songs that we sing. God, that we would be about living a life that mirrors you. That you came to the world to offer us reconciliation and grace. God, we should be about that. Help us, because it's not easy, but we know it's worth it. This is our prayer. We ask it in the name of Jesus, our King. Amen. I would invite you to stand with me as Caleb leads us in a song that we begin to sing. If there's a way that we can pray for you today, I would invite you to come. I'm going to be here. Some of the rest of our staff and our elders, our prayer team will be here as well as we sing. We would love the chance to pray for you.
Sing this out together. In our creation, suddenly articulate, with 1,000 tongues to lift one cry. And from north to south and east to west, we hear Christ be magnified. I'll stand strong and worship you. And if it puts me in the fire, I'll rejoice 'cause you're there too. And I won't be formed by feelings, I'll hold fast to what is true. 'Cause if the cross brings transformation, you can't hang me there with you. 'Cause death is just a doorway to resurrection life. If I join you in your suffering, then I'll join you when you rise. And when you return in glory, with all the angels and the saints,
But that's one prayer that God will answer when we say, Christ be magnified in us. And sometimes the front end of that is coming to the realization of who we are. It's looking in the mirror of his word and seeing stories like the story of Zacchaeus and realizing that God's a lot closer than we think. Hey, thanks for listening today. And I should tell you, if you go, man, I'd love for somebody to pray with me. I'm just not sure I want to walk up in the front of a song. I get that. I'm going to stick around right here a few minutes after the service today, and I'd love a chance to talk to you, to meet you, and to pray for you if the opportunity was available. Hey, let me tell you a couple of things real quick, and then I'm going to get you out of here. We mentioned this earlier, but this week is the second week of our first round of community group signups. This is a small group environment where we move from rows and sitting shoulder to shoulder to getting across from each other face to face. And so if you're looking to be involved in community groups, you can go to our website, alamocommunity.org, and you'll click on the groups tab, and you'll be able to find a group that meets in your area. Just fill out that info, and MJ will get back to you. If you're in a place where you go like, look, there's no groups in my area, find MJ, because he may be able to talk to you about the best way to put a group in your area right there, okay? So check out MJ. He's going to be at Connection Point. Hey, middle school, high school students, this evening, we've got a movie on the lawn, starts at 7:30. I hear there's some popcorn and all kinds of good stuff. So those of you who drive yourself, be safe. And those of you who your parents are going to drive, make sure they get you here, 7:30. The movie is going to be out on the lawn. I want you to be a part of that. Last thing, this last week was the first week of school. And last Sunday, I said, hey, we have something that we want to pass along to teachers. We have $10 Starbucks gift cards that we wanted to give away to teachers and administrators and school bus drivers and all that kind of good stuff. And some of you weren't here last week, and so you missed it. And the other half of that equation is I wasn't very clear last week, and so I missed it with some of you. So here's the deal. Just want to make sure. If you didn't get one last week, if you're a teacher, you work in administration in any kind in the school. If you work at a charter school, if you're an IA on the PA or a part of the PE program, whatever that is, if you homeschool, you consider yourself a teacher, then please stop by Connection Point today. We have some gift cards that we want to give you, $10. You're going to need a lot of coffee this semester. We can't buy it all, but we can buy the first one. So stop and do that on your way out. Thanks for being here today. We'll see you next weekend right here at Alamo Community Church. God bless you as you live.